If you were born between 1965 and 1980, and some part of you still believes there's time to fix this later, stay with me. This is for you. I'm Tom. 8 years ago, I was 47, freshly divorced, and I opened my banking app and saw $7,200. 22 years of working. That was all of it. Since then, I've learned something that took me years to see clearly. The things doing the most damage to Gen X money right now are not the loud ones. Not the market. Not inflation. Not the crash everyone keeps predicting on the news. There are 5 of them. They're quiet. Most of them are running in your accounts today, and you won't feel a single one until the moment it's too late to undo it. So here's my promise. By the end of this, you'll be able to name all 5, and you'll know which one is costing you the most. The 5th one is the one nobody says out loud. We'll get there. The first one already happened. That's what separates it from everything else on this list. It isn't a decision you're about to make. It's a decision you already made years ago, in a week when you had bigger things on your mind, and you've been paying for it quietly ever since. Before I get into it, if this is the kind of thing you want more of, I put out one of these every week, and subscribing is the easiest way to not miss the next one. So, mistake number 1. Somewhere behind you is a job you left. Maybe you were laid off. Maybe you quit for something better. Maybe the company got bought and the whole department disappeared in a conference room on a Tuesday. However it happened, you packed a box, you shook some hands, and you moved on with your life. And you left money there. Not a lot, probably. That's the whole reason you forgot about it. It was $4,000, or $9,000, or $11,000. It felt like pocket change compared to the mortgage you were carrying and the kids you were feeding. You told yourself you'd deal with it once things settled down. Things never settled down. Here's what I want you to understand about that account. It didn't just sit there being small. Something happened to it while you weren't looking. There's a rule most people have never heard of. If you leave a job and your balance in that company's plan is under a certain threshold, the company doesn't have to keep you as a participant. They can push you out. Legally, without your signature. They mail a notice to whatever address they had on file, which, if you moved, they didn't. And after a waiting period, your money gets transferred out into something called a safe harbor IRA. Now here's the part that costs you. Under the rules, that money has to go somewhere safe. Capital preservation. Which in practice means a money market fund or something close to it. Not the market, not stocks, not growth. It gets parked in the financial equivalent of a parking garage, and it sits there. And that threshold, it used to be $5,000. As of 2024, it went up to $7,000. Read that again, $7,000. Anything under that in an old employer's plan can be moved out from under you and put into a holding pattern where it earns almost nothing while fees eat at it from the other side. I know this because it happened to me. Before the industrial equipment job, I worked at a distribution warehouse in my 20s. 3 years. I had a small 401k there, $3,100 in it when I walked out the door in the 90s. I never thought about it again, not once. It was $3,100 and I was 26 and I had a life to live. 2 years ago, I went looking for it. Took me 4 phone calls and a records request to find where it had ended up. When I finally got the statement, the balance was a little under $5,000. $3,100 had become $4,800 in 30 years. I sat with that for a long time. Then I did the math on what it would have been if it had just stayed in a plain index fund the whole time. Nothing clever, no timing, no genius. Just left alone in the market like everyone tells you to do. North of $50,000, $50,000. From a job I barely remember. From a decision I never actually made. I just didn't make the other one, and I'm not special here. A research firm that tracks this stuff estimated there are around 29 million forgotten 401k accounts sitting in the American retirement system, holding somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.6 trillion. 29 million. That's not a rounding error. That's a generation's worth of loose change, and a lot of it belongs to people watching this right now. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it in your head. How many jobs have you had since you were 22? Count them. Not the ones you're proud of, all of them. Now, how many of those had a retirement plan you contributed to even for a few months? And of those, how many can you tell me the current balance of right now without looking? If the answer is all of them, you're in better shape than most people your age and you can skip ahead. Truly, this one isn't your problem. But if you paused on any of them, if there's one job where your brain went sort of quiet, that's not a memory problem. That's money. That's real money with your name on it, sitting somewhere, doing nothing. And here's why this one is first on the list instead of last. It's the only mistake on here that's already finished. The damage is done. You can't get those 30 years back, and neither can I. What you can do is stop the bleeding today, and there's a specific way to do that which takes about an afternoon. But I'm going to hold that for now. Because before you go chasing money you forgot about, there's something happening in the account you didn't forget about. The big one, the one you check, the one you're counting on. And that one's worse. Now let's talk about the account you didn't forget. The one you actually log into. The one with the real number in it, the number you've quietly built your whole future around. You check that balance more than you'd admit to anyone. And every time you check it, you're looking at the wrong thing. You're looking at how much. You should be looking at what shape it's in. Mistake number 2 is the one I'd call the most common, and it's almost invisible because it doesn't look like a mistake. It looks like discipline. It looks like not panicking. It looks like exactly what everybody told you to do. Here it is. Your money is still sitting in a mix you chose a very long time ago for a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. Let me explain what I mean by mix, because this is one of those words the industry uses to make you feel stupid. When you signed up for your retirement plan, at some point there was a screen, or a form, if it was long enough ago. And that screen asked you to pick where your contributions go. Stocks, bonds, maybe a fund with a year in the name. You were 34 or 41, and you had 11 minutes before a meeting, and you pick something. That was the mix. That percentage in stocks versus everything else. And here's the thing nobody tells you at that screen. That choice has an expiration date. Not on the fund, on you. Because a mix that's exactly right for a 41-year-old is a completely different animal for a 58-year-old. And the difference isn't about being smart. It's about time. A 41-year-old who loses 30% in a crash has 25 years to make it back. He'll barely remember it by the time he retires. A 58-year-old who loses 30% has a different situation entirely, because he might need to start pulling money out of that account in 6 years, and every dollar he pulls out while it's down is a dollar that can never recover. That's a real thing with a real name. Sequence of returns risk. All it means is this: it's not just how much the market goes up and down over your lifetime, it's when. 2 people can get the exact same average return over 25 years and end up in completely different places, purely based on which years were the bad ones. The bad years that matter most are the 5 before you stop working and the 5 after. You're standing in that window right now, or you're walking into it. So the question isn't whether your mix was right. It probably was back then. The question is whether anyone ever went back and changed it. And the data on that is pretty stark. Vanguard publishes a report every year on how millions of people actually behave inside their retirement plans. And one number in there has stuck with me since the first time I read it. In a typical year, roughly 19 out of every 20 participants make no trades at all. None. They don't rebalance, they don't shift, they don't touch it. 19 out of 20. Now, most of the time, that's a good thing. Doing nothing beats panicking. I believe that. But there's a difference between doing nothing on purpose and doing nothing because you forgot the screen existed. And I want to be straight with you here because this is where a lot of channels start handing out numbers like they know you. You've probably heard the rule. Subtract your age from 100 and that's your percentage in stocks. 60 years old, 40% stocks. Clean, memorable, fits on a graphic. I don't think that rule is worth much anymore, and I'll tell you why. That rule was built when people retired at 65 and died at 73. 8 years of retirement. If you're 55 today and healthy, you might be funding 30 years, not 8. Being too conservative can hurt you just as badly as being too aggressive. It just hurts slower, so you don't notice until it's over. So no, I'm not going to tell you your number. I don't know your pension situation, your health, your spouse, whether your house is paid off, or how you actually behave when the market drops 40%. Nobody who's never met you knows that. What I will tell you is that there are 2 ways to be wrong here, and both of them are quiet. The first is being too aggressive without knowing it. You picked an aggressive mix at 41, it did beautifully for 20 years, and now you're 59 with almost everything riding on stocks, and you don't feel aggressive, you feel successful. The second one is the opposite, and I think it's the sadder one. There are people watching this who moved their money to safety in 2008 and never moved it back. I understand that. The market fell around 57% from the top in 2007 to the bottom in 2009. 57%. People watched half their life savings evaporate in 18 months while the news played on a loop. They moved everything into cash and they told themselves it was temporary. Then March 2009 came, and the market turned, and it climbed for over a decade, and they weren't in it. Not for any of it. I wasn't in the market in 2008 either. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't brave and I wasn't cautious. I just wasn't there. I was the guy who thought not participating was the safe choice, and I've spent the last 8 years paying for that particular kind of safety. So go look at the shape of your account, not the balance. The shape. Because so far both of these mistakes are about money that stayed put when it shouldn't have. The next one is different. The next one is about money that walks out of your account willingly, on purpose, with your blessing. And the reason it's so hard to stop is that it doesn't feel like a financial decision at all. It feels like being a good parent. This is the one I get the most letters about, and it's the only one on the list where I'm going to have to be careful with you. Because the first 2 were about neglect. Things you didn't do. This one is something you're choosing over and over with full knowledge, and you'd probably choose it again tomorrow. Mistake number 3 is that your retirement is quietly funding somebody else's life. I want to tell you about a woman named Paula. Paula is 59. She does medical billing for a hospital system in Dayton, and she's been doing it for 26 years. She's the kind of person who knows everyone's coffee order. She wrote to me last spring, and the first line of her message was an apology. She said she felt stupid asking, which is a thing I hear constantly, and it makes me angry every single time. Here's her situation. Her daughter got divorced 3 years ago and moved back in with 2 kids under 6. It was supposed to be 6 months. It's been 3 years. Paula covers the groceries for 5 people now. She covers the daughter's car insurance because the daughter's credit went sideways in the divorce. She pays for daycare 2 days a week so her daughter can pick up shifts. And 2 years ago, when the roof needed replacing and there was no way around it, Paula took a loan against her 401k. $18,000. Now, I want to stop on that because a lot of people don't understand what a 401k loan actually is. You're allowed to borrow from your own retirement plan, generally up to half your vested balance or $50,000, whichever is less. And it sounds harmless. You're borrowing from yourself. You pay yourself back with interest. What could be cleaner than that? Two things. The first one is obvious once someone says it out loud. While that money is out on loan, it isn't invested. $18,000 sitting outside the market for 5 years isn't $18,000. It's $18,000 plus everything it would have earned, and Paula is 59, so that's compounding she doesn't have time to replace. The second one is the part that actually scares me. If you leave that job, quit, laid off, restructured, health forces you out, the company gets sold, any of it, that loan doesn't just follow you. It comes due. You get until the tax filing deadline for that year to come up with the balance or roll it over somewhere. If you can't, the IRS stops calling it a loan and starts calling it a distribution. That means income tax on the whole remaining amount, and if you're under 59 and a half, a 10% penalty stacked on top. Think about when people usually lose jobs. It's not when things are going great. It's the exact same moment you can't come up with $18,000. That's the trap. The loan is safe right up until the day it isn't, and it stops being safe on the worst day of your year. Let me pause here, because I actually want to hear from you on this one. If you've helped an adult child financially in the last 2 years, or if you're watching a friend or a sibling do it right now and you don't know how to bring it up, tell me in the comments, not the amount, just the situation. I read them, and honestly, people finding out they're not the only one is half the value of this channel, because you are very much not the only one. There was a survey last year on this exact thing, and it found that roughly half of American parents with adult children are providing them some kind of financial support, and the average was somewhere around $1,400 a month. $1,400 a month. That's not the occasional emergency. That's a second mortgage you never signed for. And on the education side, it's worse because it's formalized. Parents in this country are carrying north of $100 billion in federal loans they took out for their children's college. Not the kids' loans, the parents' loans. Debt with a 55-year-old's name on it, coming due while that person is trying to build the last decade of their savings. Now here's where I have to be careful, and I'm going to say the honest thing instead of the easy thing. I don't have children. So when I sit here and do the math on what Paula's $18,000 will cost her by 70, I'm doing arithmetic. I'm not doing what she's doing. I've never had to look at my own grandchild across a kitchen table and decide that my retirement account matters more than that kid's daycare. I don't know what that feels like, and I'm not going to pretend I do, and I don't trust anyone who tells you the answer is simple. What I can tell you is what Paula told me, because she got there before I did. She said the problem was never that she was helping. The problem was that nobody had ever told her the difference between helping and disappearing. Helping has a shape. It has an amount, it has an end date, and everybody involved knows what it is. Disappearing has no shape. It just expands to fill whatever room you give it, quietly, month after month. And one day you look up and you're 62 and the number in your account is the same number it was at 55. Paula didn't have a shape. She had love and no edges. She's working on that now. I'll tell you where she landed later, because what she did was harder than what most people do, and it wasn't what you'd expect. But I need to move, because we're halfway through the list, and the next one is different in kind. The first three are all about dollars leaving, forgotten, misallocated, or spent. Number 4 isn't about dollars leaving. It's about the number on your screen being a lie. Not a metaphor, not close enough. A straight arithmetic lie. And when you find out by how much, it changes what you think you own. Go get your most recent statement, the real one, the big account. Look at the number at the top. Now cross it out. Because that number is not what you have. It's what you and someone else have together, and the other party hasn't told you their share yet. Mistake number 4 is believing your balance is your balance. If your retirement money is in a traditional 401k or a traditional IRA or a 403b, and for most people in this generation the overwhelming majority of it is, then you have never paid $1 of income tax on any of it. Not on the contributions, not on 30 years of growth, not 1 cent. That was the deal. You skip the tax going in. The government let you because they're patient and you're not. The bill comes when you take it out. Every single dollar you pull out of that account gets taxed as ordinary income, not capital gains, which people love to talk about because the rates are friendlier. Ordinary income, same as a paycheck. Same as if you'd gone back to work. So let's put a real number on it. Say you've got $600,000 in there. That's a good number. That's better than most people your age, and if that's you, you've done something right. $600,000. If you end up pulling that money out in a 22% bracket, roughly $132,000 of it was never yours. It was being held for someone else. You've been checking a balance for 15 years that included a debt you didn't know you'd signed for. Your account isn't $600,000. It's $468,000 and $132,000 of somebody else's money that they let you invest on their behalf. That's the arithmetic. That's all it is. Now, when I first worked this out for my own account, my honest reaction was, fine. Annoying, but fine. I'll just be smart about it. I'll take a little out each year, keep myself in a low bracket, control the timing. And that's when I found out you don't control the timing. There's a rule called required minimum distributions. Everyone shortens it to RMDs. And if you've heard the term and let your eyes slide past it, I understand. Because it sounds like paperwork. It isn't paperwork. It's a deadline. At a certain age, the government stops waiting. They require you to pull a percentage out of that account every single year, whether you need the money or not. Whether the market is up or down, whether you have a single expense to cover or not one. You've been thinking of that account as a reservoir you can sip from. It isn't. At some point, it becomes a faucet that turns itself on and you can't shut it off. Here's the part that matters specifically for this generation, and I want you to actually hear the years. The rules changed a few years back. If you were born between 1951 and 1959, your required withdrawals start at 73. But if you were born in 1960 or later, and that's a lot of you watching, that's the back half of Gen X, yours start at 75. Now on the surface, that sounds like a gift. 2 extra years of growth. Great. It's not a gift. It's a delay, and delay makes this problem bigger, not smaller. Because the amount they make you take out isn't a flat percentage. It's based on a table, and the older you are, the bigger the slice. At 75, the table works out to roughly 4% of your balance. Every year. By 80, it's closer to 5. By 85, it's over 6%. And by then, you've had 2 more decades of growth on a bigger account. So 6% of that number is a much larger check than 4% of today's number. Every one of those checks is ordinary income. And they don't land in an empty year. That's the piece almost nobody connects. Your required withdrawal lands on top of your Social Security. On top of your pension, if you have one. On top of whatever part-time work you're still doing because you like it. They stack. And you can find yourself at 78, having made no decision at all, sitting in a higher tax bracket than the one you were in when you were working full-time. Let that sit for a second. Higher taxes in retirement than during your career. Not because anything went wrong, because everything went right. And if you miss one of those withdrawals, forget it. Misread the letter. Your spouse handled the accounts and now they don't. The penalty for that is 25% of the amount you failed to take, reduced to 10 if you catch it quickly, but 25% for a paperwork error on money you weren't even trying to keep. So why does anyone put up with this? Because for 30 years the deduction felt good. Every April you owed less. It felt like winning. It was never a discount. It was a payment plan. Now, I have to be honest about the limits of what I can tell you here. I don't know what the tax code looks like in 2040. Nobody does. Anyone who tells you with confidence that rates will be higher is guessing, and anyone who tells you they'll be lower is guessing too. They just sound calmer about it. That's not knowledge. That's a personality. What I do know is that right now, today, you can find out your real number. The after-tax one. It takes 10 minutes and a pen, and it will be the most uncomfortable 10 minutes of your month. And there's a window, a specific stretch of years, and for most people it's shorter than they think, where you can actually do something about that number. Where you get to choose the tax bill instead of receiving it. That window is one of the 5. It's not number 5, but it's connected to it. Now, before I get to the last one, I need to tell you something about it. I almost didn't include it in this video. Not because it's complicated, it's the simplest one on the list. I almost cut it because it's the one that makes people uncomfortable enough to stop watching, and I've watched other people in this space skip it for exactly that reason. So if you stay with me for the next few minutes, I'll show you the mistake that costs Gen X households more than the other 4 combined. And it happens on a single day. Here it is. Mistake number 5 is that you have built your entire retirement plan around 2 people, and at some point, there is going to be one. I know. I felt you flinch. That's exactly why nobody says it out loud. We are the generation that grew up being told to plan. Spreadsheets, projections, retirement calculators with a little slider you drag back and forth. And every single one of those tools asks you the same set of questions. Your age, your spouse's age, your combined income, your combined savings. Not one of them asks you the only question that actually determines whether the survivor is okay. Which one of you goes first, and what happens to the other one the next morning? I want to walk you through what actually happens mechanically, because the emotion of this is obvious and the mechanics are not. And it's the mechanics that do the damage. Start with Social Security, because that's where it lands first and hardest. Right now, if you're married, 2 checks arrive, yours and theirs. And over the years, those 2 checks have merged in your head into one household number because that's how you live. One account, one set of bills, one number that has to cover it. When one of you dies, the survivor does not keep both checks. They keep the larger one. That's it. The smaller one stops. Let me put actual numbers on that because keeps the larger one sounds almost reasonable until you write it down. Say the higher earner is drawing $2,900 a month. Say the other one, the one who took years off to raise kids, or to care for a parent, or who worked in a job that never paid what it should have, is drawing $1,500. Household income from Social Security, $4,400 a month. Now one of them dies. The survivor's Social Security income is $2,900 a month. That's a 34% drop in guaranteed income, arriving in the same month as a funeral. And here's what doesn't drop by 34%. The property tax, the homeowner's insurance, the roof, the furnace, the car registration, the internet bill, the water heater that fails in February. A house doesn't cost less to keep warm because there's one person in it. Almost none of the fixed costs of a life are actually per person. The income is cut by 1/3. The bills are cut by maybe 1/10. That gap is the whole mistake. Now, that's the part some people know. Maybe you knew that one. Stay with me because the second half is the part I almost never hear discussed anywhere, and it's arguably worse. The tax return, For the year in which your spouse dies, you can generally still file a joint return. One last time. So the first year on paper looks almost normal. The following year you file as a single person. Now the single filing status is not just a different box on a form. The single standard deduction is roughly half the married one. And the tax brackets for a single filer are roughly half as wide all the way up, meaning income that was comfortably sitting in a low bracket while you were married gets pushed into a higher one the moment you're filing alone. So think about what just happened to that survivor. Their income went down by a third, and their tax rate went up. Read those two sentences together, because separately they're just unfortunate, and together they're something else. Less money coming in, taxed harder on the way in. That's not bad luck. That's the structure. It is working exactly as designed, and it is doing it to the person least equipped to fight it in the worst year of their life. Financial planners have a name for this that I don't especially like because it sounds tidy. They call it the widow's penalty. There's nothing tidy about it, and it is not rare. This is not an edge case I dug up to scare you. The commonly cited figure in this field is that roughly 4 out of 5 men die married, and roughly 4 out of 5 women die single. The average age of widowhood in this country is often put at somewhere around 59, which, if you're doing the math, is not 80-something. That's an age a lot of you are staring directly at. Poverty statistics tell the same story from the other end. Among Americans over 65, the poverty rate for widowed women runs several times higher than for married women the same age, same houses, same neighborhoods, same decades of work. One difference. Now, before I go further, I want to speak directly to the people this doesn't describe because I'm one of you. If you're divorced or single, this whole section might feel like it's about somebody else's life. It isn't, and here's a piece of it that almost nobody knows, and that took me 2 years to find out about myself. If you were married for at least 10 years and you're currently unmarried, you may be able to claim Social Security on your ex-spouse's record, their earnings record, not yours. And it doesn't reduce what they get, it doesn't require their permission, and in most cases they never even find out. 10 years of marriage. That's the line. I was married for 19. I found that out at 53 from a stranger in a comment section, not from the 20 years of financial advice I'd been half listening to. That's the state of things. So that's the mistake, stated plainly. You've been planning as a household, and the household is temporary. But knowing that isn't the valuable part, and I want to be careful not to leave you with just the fear, because fear isn't useful and I'm not in the business of selling it. Here's the valuable part. Almost every decision that determines how badly that day lands on the survivor is a decision you make now, while there are still 2 of you. While it's still theoretical and slightly uncomfortable to talk about over dinner, one of those decisions gets made in a single afternoon, usually at 62, usually by the higher earner, usually alone, usually without anyone explaining what it actually does. And it is, without any exaggeration, the most consequential financial decision of your entire life, worth more than every other item on this list put together. Most people make it in about 20 minutes. Let me show you what it really is. The decision is when you turn on Social Security. That's it. That's the whole thing. There's no product to buy, no advisor required, no fee. Just a date. You pick a month and the money starts. And almost everyone I've ever talked to about it thinks of it as a personal decision. My money, my health, my call. You sit down, you look at your own life expectancy, you think about your father who died at 71, and you decide. That framing is the mistake, not the answer you pick. The framing. Because if you are the higher earner in your household, the number you lock in on that afternoon is not really your number. It is the number your spouse will live on after you're gone. Let me show you the machinery, and then I'll show you what it's worth in dollars. For anyone born in 1960 or later, which is most of this generation, full retirement age is 67. That's the age where you get what the system calls your full benefit. You're allowed to start early. 62 is the earliest, but starting at 62 doesn't just move the money forward, it permanently reduces the check. For someone with a full retirement age of 67, claiming at 62 cuts the benefit by roughly 30%. Not for a few years, for life. You're also allowed to wait past 67, and for every year you wait, up to age 70, the system adds about 8%, also permanently. So the full range is this. Claim at 62, you get about 70% of your benefit. Wait until 70, you get about 124%. That's a 77% difference in your monthly check based on nothing but a date. Now put a person in it. Say your full benefit at 67 would be $2,900 a month. Claim at 62, about $20,300 a year. Call it $2,030 a month. Wait until 70, about $3,600 a month. $1,566 a month between those two decisions. Here's where it stops being about you. When the higher earner dies, the survivor's benefit is based on what that higher earner was getting. So if you claimed at 62 and locked in 2030, your spouse doesn't get to reset the clock. They don't get a do-over. They live on a reduced version of your reduced number for however long they live. If your spouse outlives you by 18 years, and a lot of them do because in most of these households the wife is a few years younger and statistically likely to live longer anyway, that single afternoon decision is worth north of $300,000 to her, before you even count cost of living adjustments, which compound on top of the bigger number and make the gap wider every single year. $300,000. From a form. And I want you to notice something about how that decision usually gets made, because this is the part that gets me. Nobody frames it that way. When you go to claim, you're thinking about your break-even. You're thinking, if I wait until 70, I need to live to 82 just to come out ahead. And my dad didn't make it to 71, so what's the point? That break-even math is real. It's also answering the wrong question. If you're single, the break-even question is the right one, genuinely. If you're single and in poor health, claiming early can be entirely correct, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you otherwise. But if you're married and you're the higher earner, waiting isn't a bet on how long you'll live. It's insurance on how long she'll live. Those are completely different products. One is a gamble, the other is protection. And the system presents both of them to you on the same screen with the same button. Now let me stack this back on top of everything from a few minutes ago, because this is where the whole video comes together. Remember what happens to the survivor? One check instead of two. Single tax brackets instead of married. And there's a third layer I haven't mentioned yet. Medicare premiums in this country aren't flat. Above a certain income, you pay surcharges, higher monthly premiums based on your tax return from 2 years earlier. And the income threshold where those surcharges kick in for a single filer is roughly half the threshold for a married couple. So the survivor, with a third less income, in tougher brackets, can also find themselves paying more for Medicare than they did when there were two of them. And the fourth layer, those required withdrawals we talked about, they don't shrink when your spouse dies. In most cases, the survivor rolls the deceased spouse's IRA into their own, so it's the same pile of money, generating the same forced income, now filtered through single brackets and single Medicare thresholds. One less check. Higher rates, higher premiums. Same forced withdrawals. That's four things happening at once to one person in the year after the worst day of their life. And every one of them was set in motion by decisions made while both of you were still healthy, still working, still assuming there'd be time to figure it out. Which brings me back to that window I mentioned. Between the day you stop working and the day the government forces those withdrawals to start, there's a stretch of years, for a lot of people, roughly from 62 to 75, where your income is temporarily low and you actually control your tax bracket. That is the only period in your entire life when you get to choose your tax rate. That's the window where you can move money out of the traditional account into a Roth, pay the tax now at a rate you selected, and hand the survivor an account that generates no forced withdrawals and no taxable income at all. Same money, different container, completely different outcome for whoever is left. Most people spend that window doing nothing because nothing feels like the safe choice, and because no one ever told them the window closes. So that's all five. The money you left behind, the mix that expired, the love with no edges, the balance that was never yours, and the plan built for two. Now, I told you at the very beginning that by the end of this, you'd know which one is costing you the most. I meant it, and there's a way to find out. It takes about 15 minutes, and I want to walk you through it because it's the only part of this video that changes anything. Here's how you find out which one is yours. Not a calculator, not an app. A piece of paper and 5 minutes of honesty. Write down 5 numbers. 1. Every job you've had since you were 22, and next to each one, the current balance, or a question mark if you don't know it. The question marks are mistake number 1. 2. The date you last actually looked at your allocation, not your balance, your allocation, and changed something in it on purpose. If that date is more than 3 years old, that's mistake number 2. 3. Every dollar that left a retirement account in the last 3 years to cover someone else's life. Not judgment, just the number. That's mistake number 3. 4. Your balance, multiplied by 78% if that's a rough guess at what you'd keep after tax. Write both numbers side by side. The gap between them is mistake number 4, and it's been there the whole time. 5. If you're married, the date you or your spouse plan to claim Social Security, and whether that date was chosen for the higher earner's life expectancy or for the survivor's. That's mistake number 5, and it's the only one that isn't really about you. Now, a word on each of those because the number alone doesn't tell you what to feel about it. If you found question marks in the first one, old jobs, forgotten balances, that's the good news mistake, oddly enough. It's the only one where the fix doesn't require a hard conversation with anyone. A few phone calls, a records request, maybe an afternoon. Annoying, not painful. If your allocation hasn't moved in 3 years, that one isn't about being lazy. Most people I hear from didn't avoid it. They just never got a clear signal that the screen from 20 years ago had an expiration date on it. Now you have that signal. The third number, the one about money leaving to help someone else, that one isn't a math problem at all, and I'm not going to pretend a spreadsheet fixes it. What fixes it is what fixed it for Paula. A shape, a number, a date, both of you at the table. The fourth number is the one people flinch at because it's the only one where the money was never really there to begin with. You're not losing anything by writing it down. You're just finally seeing what you actually have. And the fifth, the claiming date, if you're the higher earner and you haven't filed yet, that number on your paper isn't really about you at all. Sit with that before you write anything down next to it. 5 numbers, 5 minutes. You'll know exactly where you stand and which one is actually costing you. I told you I'd tell you where Paula landed. She didn't stop helping her daughter. I want to be clear about that because I don't think that was ever really the point. What she did was sit down with her once at the kitchen table and give the help a shape, an amount, a stop date, something they both wrote down. She stopped calling it a loan from herself. She started calling it a decision made on purpose with an edge around it. That's it. That's the whole ending. No dramatic turnaround, no windfall. Just a woman who finally gave her love a shape instead of letting it run open. I think that's most of what this actually is, not one big fix. 5 quiet corrections made on purpose by someone who finally sat down and looked. I started this at 47 with $7,200 and no plan. And if you're watching this and some part of you recognized your own account in one of these 5, I want you to know something. You're not behind everyone. You're behind the version of yourself that wishes she'd looked sooner. That's a different problem, and it's one you can still do something about. If this was useful to you, the honest thing I can ask is that you subscribe. Not because the algorithm needs it, because I put one of these out every single week, real numbers, no theater, and I'd rather you not miss the ones that actually apply to your account. There's one thing that ties directly into everything we just covered. That window I mentioned, the years where you control your own tax rate, it has a name, it has rules, and most people either don't know it exists or use it completely wrong. I made the entire breakdown into its own video, and if any part of today felt like it was about you, that one will too. Go look at your 5 numbers first, then go watch that one.